Welcome to Dear Mama podcast, part of the Airway Circle radio station. I am your host, Dr. Catherine Murphy. Today, I get to chat with Dr. Jenny Thurner. So the reason why I asked Dr. Thurner to join us today is because she is a pediatric physical therapist, and my goodness, we have so many topics to discuss with lots of changes going on with the CDC milestones. And I came across this African proverb, which just fits into everything we're going to talk about. It is, by crawling, a child learns to stand. So please help me welcome Dr. Jenny Thurner. She is practicing in Northwest Indiana. She is author of this wonderful guide, Healthy Baby Habits, Help Your Baby Dominate Development. Isn't that just awesome right there? Dominate development. She is a pediatric physical therapist, certified infant massage instructor, and licensed Learn with Less facilitator. She owns her own solo practice, as well as being part of the assessment team for Indiana First Steps Early Intervention. Please help me welcome Dr. Jenny Thurner. So Jenny.
Thank you for having me. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule on a Friday, where I'm sure that your daughter would love to be playing with you. So can you briefly describe your path to starting your own pediatric physical therapy practice?
Sure. So, it could be a long speech here, but basically when I first got out of PT school, I worked with the most amazing team at it was a rehab hospital, but I worked in the outpatient clinic with pediatrics. And so amazing team. So I knew I had like this big picture that everybody should work like this is how it should all go. And then I moved up north and I couldn't find a facility. I couldn't find a team that met those expectations. And I just felt so lost. Like really, this was the norm. Like I had like the best case scenario. I felt like getting out of PT school. So with that, I worked in some clinics for a while, a couple years, and then I was offered the position for First Steps assessment team member. And so I was like, I'm going to go do that. And then I had this whole big image of, oh, maybe I could do something on my own, but I didn't know what that even looked like. And so just trucking along, trying to figure it out. But just being on the assessment team made me feel like it was a team. Like when we assess kids, I'm not just looking at motor skills. We're looking at the big picture, what's going on, how this affects communication, this affects social skills. And so just having that whole mindset, I just knew there was something missing. There's something missing. I had to find, right? There's a hole and I couldn't figure it out. And so I did, right? We have to do all this continuing education. And I went to this course, and this was the first course. It was called the Tummy Time Method. And so it was the first course. Yeah. First course I went to that was not PT and OT saturated, right? Mm-hmm. So many different multidisciplinary professionals in there. And my mind was blown. I was like, what is this? Like, this is a thing. Like, this is how we all supposed to work. And so that stemmed me to focus more on infant practice, how all the things affects the babies. And then obviously how our babies develop affects everything else. When we go to school, what is that going to look like? So that is really how all of that unfolded. And then obviously that's how I met you, Dr. Mm-hmm. Catherine, with the whole tongue tie aspect of everything. And then I met other professionals that really were driven to help this population, the infant population. So that is how I became more focused in private practice. And that's kind of where I am right now.
And so you mentioned tongue ties. Were you taught anything about that in your training, or how did you learn? Was it the tummy tie method that was your first introduction to tongue ties?
It was that course, the tummy tie method course. The facilitator was an author in that book, and mm-hmm. The book was displayed at class, and I'm like, why are we talking about tongue ties? I was so confused for like a day and a half. I had no idea why everyone kept talking about it. And then obviously I bought the book right there, read it. And then for whatever reason, the first book club meeting, I think, was that book. And like, I was just like, wow, but I had no training, no recollection, nothing that so put tongue, tie, and motor development together for me until that class.
So the book Tongue Tied by Dr. Richard Baxter was at the
Yes.
Tummy Time Method. And okay, so what got you introduced to wanting to go to the Tummy Time Method course?
There's a focus on regulating the neurological system in that course. So
Okay.
it's about tummy time, but the whole method has so much more than just tolerating tummy time, accepting tummy time. It's a full body activity. And if we have restrictions in our oral tissue, we have restrictions in our body. And so it talks about all of that and how we can help the baby regulate and get through that phase of optimal development.
Because I came across the Tummy Time Method when I was at the AAMS, and I wish I had put the connection together earlier, because it took a little bit. So when you say it took a whole day and you saw the book there, I have to say it makes sense, because if you haven't heard of tongue ties before, and then you're in a group where many have come across this topic before, it is different for those that have been introduced. And for those that just have heard it, it takes a little bit to kind of integrate it into our thinking, because it isn't something that's taught. And with my son, he went through physical therapy because of his torticollis, but there was never a discussion between the pediatric PT he was seeing and tongue tie. Could you talk about that a little bit? Because I mentioned it to that provider and she said, well, I don't really know, in a much more professional way. But that was the look on her face. I'm like, I know that look, because I'm professional too, where you don't want to tell me, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. So can you talk a little bit more about torticollis and tongue ties?
For sure. So the theory, well, okay, so we have tight tissue, and go back to that PT that you saw. Most of us have no idea there's a connection, right? Unless you're exposed to it. And that's how I feel. That's with anything, right? But to go back to the restrictions, oral tissue, restrictions down the midline of our body. But there's the theory that torticollis is not a tight, it's not a tight neck muscle, in my experience. It's not the neck, it's the trunk that pulls the neck into that position. And so everything in the midline is pulling, torquing, but it's more, the baby is more dysregulated. They haven't figured out, they have a right and a left side of the body. They can't organize. And they're brought into this world and gravity sinks them down, right? And they're going to move however they were moving in utero. Some babies can get out of it. Some need a little bit of help. But if we have restrictions in our movement patterns, we're going to keep sinking back into that preferred position. So, like I said, because I saw your face when I said it's not the neck. It's not the neck, even though the books keep saying it's the neck. It's the neck. Yes, we can address the neck, but we have to address the trunk. I always go to the trunk first, and the neck kind of unfolds itself.
Wow, that's fascinating. And so with that, okay, so with that question, and I'm trying, because this isn't something that I've actually discussed with you before very much, but reflexes, primary reflexes. So can you tell me a little bit more about that and this dysregulation with babies?
Absolutely. So if we just focus on a kiddo that has a head preference, right? And so if we're always looking one way, that reflex will be stronger and stronger. And so we're not integrating both sides. So with all babies are born with reflexes. Or we develop them and then we have to integrate them in order to do higher level skills, right? So if a baby's not moving symmetrically, they're not integrating these reflexes symmetrically. And so it's kind of like they're fighting their little bodies, trying to just move. And then, if one side is stronger, say their head preference is stronger to the right, that reflex is going to be stronger, or the reflex is pulling them into that. And so if we can get a baby moving, get them lined up symmetrically, midline, it's easier for them to move so they can integrate these reflexes. So a bigger picture, if these reflexes stay here, like a startle reflex, if the startle
Mhm.
reflex is always present, things are harder. Things are going to be harder. They're in a heightened state of awareness. Um, Things will set them off a little bit easier if the body movement reflexes aren't integrated. We might crawl different because we have a stronger side because that's the way their body's pulling them into. I'm trying not to get too technical here, but it's hard. It's hard to explain that. But if bottom line is we have to get the body doing the same thing on both sides. So our brain is
Mhm.
we have a body brain coordination going on.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I think the more I learn about other healthcare providers and how they view things, it's so much easier. We all want to get to homeostasis, whatever that homeostasis is, which we've all learned in school. In dentistry, we talk about the mouth pH. We want to be at the pH of 7 so we don't develop caries. I understand wanting to get to midline, and I just love the different views of what our neutral is. So what other team members would you kind of refer a mom to help do that? Like what aspects then do you say, hey, that's out of my realm. They need some help, additional help in other ways.
For sure. So I'm still focused like on the okay, if a kid has misshapen head
Mhm.
for whether it's torticollis, different positioning styles, uh, and I believe if we do a team approach, we get results a little bit quicker. It's not trying to push to get there faster. It's just you just see it all come together. So, for instance, a chiropractor
Okay.
who focuses on craniosacral strategies to help remold the head with very gentle touches. I always have to tell
Mhm.
parents, very gentle. It kind of looks like they're just kind of holding their head, but they're doing their thing. Because we want to avoid the helmet. A helmet's there if you need it. There's nothing wrong with it, but we want to avoid a helmet. So um, if we start young, if we start super young, we can do it with just positioning and body movement and taking away the tension. Tension, that's the big word, tension.
Mhm.
Um, with chiropractors, obviously, if there's a tongue restriction, I'm referring to somebody else, right? Because I don't do the mouth. I work the body to work the mouth. Um, so not anyone, I prefer people we send to for releases and obviously OT and speech. If it's outside my realm, if it's outside, if their regulation system is so disorganized that my tricks in my toolbox isn't working, I'm going to send to an occupational therapist that's more specialized. And obviously, speech does their thing. If
Mhm.
it's feeding, lactation consultants are big as well
And so
that I'll send to.
what age should moms start to ask, like, hey, is this an appropriate thing to reach out to a pediatric physical therapist for? Because I know that as a mom myself, sometimes I'm like, well, I don't want to be looked at like, oh gosh, why are you calling me already? But also you said the younger the better. And so what age, when can they start being proactive without, I shared with you briefly how I was told I was just an overactive, overly worried mom versus no, like your concern is valid and I can help address that.
Right. I always think all moms' concerns are valid because I'm in the same boat. And
Thank you. Thank you for that.
yes, I feel like I know too much, which just drives me crazy sometimes. But I think all moms or dads concerns are valid. So if if you feel, I always say go with your mommy gut. If you feel like something's off, if you don't go Google everything, right? But if you feel like something's off, obviously if it's your second baby, you're gonna compare. But if it's your first baby and it's off, or if you just want someone to double check, I'm absolutely okay with that. I don't know if all providers are like that, but I'm
Mhm.
absolutely because even if someone specialized is looking at them, they can also, that specialist can give you ideas what to do next or what to look for next, or if this is missing, this could be a little bit more concerning. But I always think there's foundational skills that all kids should have. And if we're skipping those, if we're not getting those, or if we're having trouble getting over those, the baby might need help. The mommy needs help with coaching through those things. But I always think if you see something that's a little bit different, reach out. And if if you don't like the answer your pediatrician gave you, it's okay to seek more advice from somebody. But make sure that advice is from someone that knows what they're doing.
Now, do all states have a program like First Steps? Is it called First Steps something else in some states?
Yeah, so it's either First Steps or most of them are called early intervention.
Okay.
But every state has a program, and it's the before we go to school education, special education, basically. So we do birth to 3, and we look at all areas of development. So that's communication, cognition, social skills, adaptive, which is feeding, falls into that, and then fine and gross motor skills. So we're looking at everything because everything intertwines, right? And so we have to like I said, make sure we have those foundational skills to keep progressing because we want our kids to succeed, right? And then
I love how you say dominate development. I love that. Yes. So with that, do you have to have your pediatrician's referral to reach out to First Steps, or can you do it yourself?
Nope, anybody can refer their kid to First Steps or early intervention. They just call the local, you can call the state. Every state has their number, and then we're broken up into clusters. So every area, so Northwest Indiana has their own cluster that you would call, but you can put it in. In the end, the pediatrician has to sign off, but typically that's not an issue.
And now with these changes with the CDC and the milestones, how is that kind of affecting the referrals that are coming into you? How does this affect moms? Because the big thing is the aspect of crawling, right? So can you tell us a little bit about why crawling from your perspective is so important?
Yes.
Or do we need another podcast for that? I think we need a whole one just for the crawling.
It's fine. Like, I totally understand why the CDC changed what they changed. Like, it does make sense. But I don't understand why they eliminated crawling, for instance. I don't understand why it's not in there somewhere. But the only reasoning I could find was there's such a big age range when a kid crawls or can crawl, and they couldn't put it in a specific checklist. That's the only thing I can kind of come up with. However, crawling is so important to our development. Like I said, it's mind and body connection. Okay, so we have to use both sides of our body. So crawling, a typical crawling pattern is we're using both sides of our body. So we're using both sides of our brain, right? We need both sides of our brain to talk so we can read and write when we go to school. So we can sit still for brief moments when we're in kindergarten to listen and pay attention. It has to do with attention. It has to do with visual, spatial, depth perception, 3D, how we take in the world, how we get to play with our hands. It builds upper body strength so we can write, right? Builds our core so we can sit down and we can eat well. It's so passionate. We're also passionate about crawling, but it's such a big foundation. Just like I said, tummy time is so big, crawling is so big. It's just important to get to the next step so everything just flows like it's supposed to. If your kid did not crawl, it's still okay, right? So we can I always say, let's go back to crawling. And parents look at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, no, let's go back to crawling. Let's do some tunnels, crawl through tunnels, crawl up the steps, safe climbing, right? A lot of safe climbing, climb up the slide. We can do those things, but we don't want to just like, oh, my kid didn't crawl, because my head goes, oh no, like not oh no, but like, is it, and could it affect the way your kiddo reads later or just even writes later? So that's where my head always goes, because like, oh, let's go back and we can still do those things because we want the brain to talk, right?
So I'm really interested in the connection between lack of crawling and being able to sit still. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I don't know a lot. I'm sure there's people that do a lot of research on that, but where my brain goes is, did we not crawl because our reflexes were integrated, or maybe they weren't ever developed, because we have spinal reflexes that help us do this movement. Um, and then if these are still active and we have clothes on, or our back is against the chair, it's going to make us wiggle because it's irritating. So you get that component too. So there's a lot of that goes. I mean, there's so many things, right? If you drew a bubble, all the arrows that are gonna, like, this could be thing. It's not something to be think, oh my gosh, what happened to my kid, or is that why? Well, sometimes we just don't know why, right? But we can always go back. I always say, always go back and build that strong foundation. You can still do that, just so we can get to that next level.
Wow. I love looking at the different reasons behind kids and their attention. That's a huge topic these days. And I was just on this, I don't know, this Facebook group that was talking about kids that couldn't sit still. I'm like, oh, but there's so many things that go into kids not being able to sit still. I mean, other than the fact that they're kids, right? So from what I understand, then there's that connection between tummy time, if they were able to tolerate tummy time, or if tummy time just wasn't provided for them. Tummy time to crawling, correct? Like if they didn't really excel in tummy time, they may not have then gone into the crawling phase easily. They may have struggled with that. And then the lack of crawling and going straight into walking has the effects with more higher functions. And so actually we can tie that all back together with any kind of tension, whether that's from a tongue tie tension or just any kind of tension in the body that didn't get worked out, right?
Right.
Wow.
Yes. So there's like this thought process of birth trauma, right? Birth is trauma. Whether it was a great delivery, it's all trauma, and it's trauma for
Can
mommies.
you say that again? Because
birth is trauma.
Thank you.
It's good trauma and it can be bad trauma, right? But we have tension. And so there's a thought process about babies, if they have a hard time working out that tension, you hold that tension your entire life like that. So I'm gonna go do this another course, right? Because I feel like the need to do all these things. And it's a lot of craniosacral work, but it's talking about birth trauma, and like we hold that tension. So your body's not breathing like it should be because you're holding so much tension in there. Not breathing like your lungs, you're just it's not in sync with,
it's not expanding as it should be.
Yeah.
Expanding and releasing. Wow. I love that. Wow. I'm just so excited for us to be, for those that Dr. Thurner and I are going to be on a Connections book club, and I'm just so excited to hear even more integration. So you guys will have to stay tuned for that too, because there's so many questions. But yet I need to move on to one of our last questions of what kind of mom to mom wisdom would you like to share? We've gone through so much, just you saying that birth is trauma and letting every mom know that she went through trauma, baby went through trauma, and trauma isn't, like you said, it's something necessary. And to address that, especially to ease those concerns, because I've said it to moms and they've given me that look of what, when I refer to birth trauma. I'm sure you've said that to moms many times, and we just need to know that it's something part of the process of living, right?
Right. Maybe there's another word we could say. We'll have to think about that.
The birth process artifacts. So work on that, Dr. Thurner. Put that in your next guidebook.
Okay.
The guidebook to get through the previously known as birth trauma.
Yes.
So what mom to mom wisdom would you like to give to mamas out there?
Well, my wisdom comes today just because, so my daughter's 8, so this is what I'm feeling right now. So I want to say that your child's behaviors don't always reflect your parenting. And it took me a long time, and my mom would tell me that over and over and over, but you just take it to heart. Like, why why is she doing that? Why is she acting like that? But I have to take a step back, and she has to make her own choices. She has to make her own preference. She gets to have her own preferences. She needs to learn from those choices that she makes, good or bad. So the wisdom is taking a step back and let them be them. So it's difficult. It's difficult for me, because I'm very, I would say, controlling. I don't know a better word for that, but the more I sit back and be patient with myself, be patient with my daughter. But the bottom line is their behaviors do not always reflect you. A
Well, and
reflection on you.
that's that's so important because you had just mentioned the aspect about child's behavior and possible connections between, tensions, unintegrated reflexes, things like that. And
Mhm.
that's so important because so often there is that quickness to judge a mom based off of how their child is acting instead of looking at why that child is doing that and understanding there's so many reasons that
Mhm.
can have root to something such as tongue tie, such as tension, lack of sleep, lack of eating proper foods. And, I feel like the mission with the Connections Book Club and myself, we're all just trying to let moms know that we can find the why and work on the why. So thank you for that mom to mom wisdom. That is incredible. And so now we're going to round out our session with a little bit of mom time, some self-care for ourselves. So this is the take 3 for me portion. So for those of you that can kind of maybe stand up from your chair, if you're driving or if you're on the podcast like we are, we're going to stay sitting here, but you can put your arms up and just kind of get more in tune, connect your body to the rest of yourself. So this is portion 1 is just kind of movement. We do a lot of face yoga. Next is our mindset. And so Dr. Thurner said that she would carry us through the mindset reset. And during that, we look at what you are proud of, what you're grateful for, and your intention for the day. So what would you like to share with us?
Let's see. I'm grateful that I got to do this podcast with Dr. Murphy today. And I'm proud that I did it and I accepted it,
Yeah.
because this is not a norm for me. This is outside my comfort zone. And it's okay to go outside your comfort zone, because it ends up being okay, right? And then my intention today is just to be calm in my mind and be patient with myself, because there's a lot of pressure. I put a lot of pressure on myself.
Thank you so much. Those are all things I think we can all identify with. And I appreciate you being on this podcast. And you did wonderful. I would love to have you more often because I think we could just talk and talk. And I think the listeners probably have so many questions. And as always, I would love for anyone to reach out. In the notes, there will be my email, but I will say it here too. It's contact us at inharmonyorthodontics.com. So please reach out. And if you have questions, I'm going to be asking Dr. Thurner to join me again on a future podcast. So reach out, let me know. But Dr. Thurner's information will also be in the notes. Her guidebook is super easy to get to. It's on Amazon and it's called Healthy Baby Habits, Help Your Baby Dominate Development, a guide for birth to 12 months. And if you look closely, you might see why I really hold this dear to my heart as well. So get the book, find out if you see the little secret in there. And Dr. Thurner, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience?
I don't think so. I appreciate you letting me do this today.
Well, this has been awesome. Please stay tuned for episode 4 when I will have Lael Johnson. She is the owner and founder of Facial Connection Myofunctional Therapy, and we will be talking everything between orthodontics and myofunctional therapy connected. And until then, enjoy your kiddos.